Welcome to Biocomputation with Dr. Max. Recently, I made a video about investments that have short value, basically malinvestments. Today, I want to talk about the opposite, investments that hold value, or more specifically, currencies that hold value. There have been some very interesting currencies that managed to survive hundreds of years, and we can learn from them. So let's dive in. Throughout human history, empires have collapsed, borders have been redrawn, economies have been shattered, yet a few select monetary systems have shown staggering resilience. When evaluating the longevity of a currency, we observed that they supported, and in the case of China, outlived dynasties that used them. For example, Sir Isaac Newton overvalued gold relative to silver and moved Britain from a bimetallic to a de facto golden standard. Silver or gold UK had been on a precious metal backing since for its currency for almost 1150 years. Then it devalued its currency and the empire disappeared. So I will briefly go through examples of long-lasting currencies in world history. They all share one thing, a commitment to quality, of purity of the metal, which minimizes counterparty risk. Specifically, metal content that really holds value in the coin has to closely match the nominal value of the coin. Divergence or devaluation means stealing from the people, asking them to treat a devalued coin the same as a fair one. The end of these currencies and the empires that supported them is also notable. They are connected. Here's a list of some of the longest running currencies in history. I will very briefly go through them, but before doing that, I want to give a brief summary for those who may not have the patience to go through the whole historical exposition that I want to share. As its name reveals, the British pound sterling was born from silver and lasted over 1100 years, allowing a minor island with a cold, wet climate and no major natural resources to conquer much of the world. Something similar also happened with the Venetian ducat, which allowed this tiny man-made island near Italy to control a large extent of the Mediterranean trade and beyond for half a millennium, until war in the face of Napoleon Bonaparte put an end to it. Venice provides an important example for Trump, which I will cover in another video shortly. So there are many connections here. But let's get back to the British Empire. It ended with the end of the silver gold standard for its money. In World War I acted as a distal mover, destroying the empire, while the destruction of the British currency acted as the proximal cause of internal collapse. Now, it's broadly recognized that British Empire existed and is gone, and we can connect its demise to the destruction of its currency. What's really useful for us is to think about these examples forward. What does it mean for US and its global hegemony? It's not recognized as an example of an empire, but although we operate as a democratic republic, there are many parallels, and we can call a rose an empire by another name, but it still smells as sweet. The United States has been on a bimetallic gold-silver standard since 1792, interrupted by civil war, which is a fascinating story that I'll also discuss in the near future. Then we switched to a gold standard in 1900. This terminated for internal transactions only 31 years later, and for settlement of external debt in 1971. No empire has survived this type of debasement, which we've experienced, 99% debasement of our currency since 1971. This is one of the reasons why multi-decade, over a century-long credit cycle is coming to an end, and it explains a lot of the US behavior, including its propensity for military conflict. I will review these deficiencies in the fall of empires by seriously debasing or outright decoupling from a representative currency that's based on precious metals in another video that's coming up shortly. Here, let us review the historical cases of longevity of currencies and empires that use them. Let's start with probably the oldest, the Chinese wushu. And please forgive me for mispronouncing. This translates as literally 5 zhu, which is an equivalent of about 100 grains of millet, nominally about 5 grams. The dimensions were fairly fixed, 2.5 centimeters in diameter with 0.12 centimeters thick, bronze alloy, which was precious, and the central square hole, which was very important. Now, this type of coin was called cash, giving the rise to US slang cash. It was first minted by Han Dynasty under Emperor Wu. It became one of the most successful pieces of standardized currency ever. It lasted over 730 years and was only phased out by the Tang Dynasty, which ultimately saw introduction of paper currency, first semi-officially and then under the Song officially, which has caused a lot of problems for the Chinese dynasties, and that's going to be another video. But here we're talking about the wushu coin that lasted 5 dynasties: the Han Dynasty, both Western and Eastern, the Three Kingdoms, the Jin Dynasty, Northern and Southern dynasties, and the Sui Dynasty. It was under early Tang, under Emperor Gaozu, in 621, where the coins were retired in favor of others. This coin brought a lot of significance besides utility. It unified the land. It had key features of the design that reduced counterfeiting, such as the raised rims around the central square hole and around the outside. Now, eventually, it was devalued over time, chiseled, the rims were clipped, and the production became more decentralized, which prevented it from maintaining its value. Moving on to another coin, the Byzantine solidus. This coin lasted over 700 years, from 312 AD to the middle of 11th century. It was introduced by Constantine, who also adopted Christianity. This gold coin became an undisputed economic backbone of commerce in Europe and Mediterranean. It was referred to as the dollar of the Middle Ages by economic historians because it was so valuable. This, of course, is a notable contrast to what happened to the Western Roman Empire. So this empire managed to maintain purity of gold by smelting incoming gold, trading it at the borders, having extremely stiff fines for counterfeiting, of course, but also critically, they had centralized minting. Let us move on to the Venetian ducat. That spanned about 513 years, from 1284 to 1797. It was first struck by the Republic of Venice, and it became a massive, in fact, global trading standard, certainly reaching as far as Asia. They also, in Venice, had strict laws against debasing the coins, and this allowed them to control its purity for over half a millennium, until the Republic finally fell to Napoleon Bonaparte at the end of 18th century. Now, let us discuss another ancient coin, Roman denarius. I alluded to the Western Roman Empire not lasting as long as the Eastern, and the currency was a very important part of that story. Specifically, the Roman denarius started at about 211 BC, lasting 450 years, significantly less time than the Byzantine solidus. Roman denarius was debased very severely in the 3rd century AD, perhaps some 150 years before the official fall of the empire. I alluded to Western Roman Empire and its currency being less long-lived than the Eastern Roman Empire. And indeed, the Roman denarius spanned about 470 years, whereas solidus lasted over 700. Denarius started in 211 BC and was severely debased in the middle of 3rd century AD. The Currency was born during war and died during war. It started during the Second Punic War to fund the expansion of the Roman Republic and the subsequent empires, which ultimately collapsed. Interestingly, we can calculate some equivalents. For example, Julius Caesar set the weight of denarius at 3.9 grams with a purity of 95 to 98%. And he also doubled the legionary pay to 225 denarii per year, which comes out to about 108,000 USD right now. As this graph shows, silver was depleted and became essentially just a veneer on these coins, which we'll revisit in case of the British pound sterling, which actually had the longest time frame of convertibility to precious metals, approximately 1150 years, beginning under the King of Mercia in 775 AD and ending permanently in 1931. It actually ended in 1914 and was shortly revived, which is an interesting story. Both the British under Winston Churchill, who was the head of the exchequer at the time, and the Soviets under Stalin tried to bring back silver gold standard unsuccessfully in late 20s, and it ended in 1931. During its lifetime, the British pound was definitely a global reserve currency. Not perhaps during the whole period, but it is the oldest currency in continuous use, but it is different now. I'll get to that in a second. It started with Anglo-Saxon era when they were minting silver pennies, and there were 240 of them to a pound of sterling silver, which is where the name comes. The transition to fiat currency certainly can be said to have undermined it, of course, compared to the standards we're discussing in this video. So let us discuss some elements of the evolution of the British pound sterling, because it's quite interesting. As I mentioned, it started under the King of Mercia in 775, specifically King Offa. The silver at the time was 92.5% pure. It was split into 240 pennies. And this lasted until Henry VIII's Great Debasement, but then it was largely revived in 1717. For the next century, it had essentially an accidental bimetallism that shifted to gold under Sir Isaac Newton. This was perhaps connected with his interest in alchemy, one of his lesser known accomplishments. He, of course, is known for physics and mathematics, but he also was involved in basically stabilizing the British pound. Sir Isaac Newton served as master of the mint, where he established a fixed exchange rate between gold and silver. He inadvertently overvalued gold, and as a result, silver fled to continental Europe, leaving Britain with a de facto gold standard out of its kind of bimetallic standard. For the next century, Britain was on a formal gold standard from 1816 to 1914. This followed a brief disruption of the Napoleonic Wars, after which the Coinage Act of 1816 by UK Parliament made gold the sole legal measure of value, which lasted until World War I, when actually all of the major empires went off their respective precious metals standards. And as I mentioned, Churchill, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1925, attempted to revive gold bullion, but this overvalued the pound and sparked massive problems, and was ultimately abandoned in 1931. So what we have is an example of ultimate debasement, but there is this interesting example of the great debasement of the middle of 16th century under Henry VIII that I want to discuss because it provides some very interesting and piquant historical analogies. He reduced the precious metal content in English coins from, perhaps 92.5%, where it was maintained for hundreds of years, to as low as 25, or in some cases even 10%. This made coins with his visage easily efface from wear, and it resulted in coins known as the Old Copper Nose. Perhaps a very fitting name to what he did with the currency, which produced inflation of 200 to 400%, and foreign merchants discounted English coins, and it sparked severe social hardship because people would refuse to take it, or it was devalued at uncertain rates. The practice continued briefly, but the damage was so severe that they finally resorted to more normal standards under Elizabeth I. What does it mean for US dollar? I see it following the trajectory that is predicted by the history of all these currencies that were unpegged from precious metals backing them. But let us recall that it was the Vietnam War that led to decoupling of the US dollar from gold by President Nixon in 1971. Similarly, military expenditures under President Trump 2.0 are putting great pressure on the dollar. In fact, we expect inflation to pick up again because of the disruptions to global trade, not just for tariffs, but with energy flows, fertilizer, helium, many things that normally flowed through the Strait of Hormuz, which is now essentially closed or reduced to a trickle. My expectation is that the US empire, yes, let's call it that, is overextending itself, resulting in the same kind of foreseeable crash and then hopefully reform. Now, Henry VIII drastically altered England's centuries-old standard to fund his military campaigns against France and Scotland, and also to support his opulent lifestyle. President Trump is also running up a massive tab for the future and may perhaps also appear as Old Copper Nose in the following way. If we look at the Trump golden statue, which he put up in Mar-a-Lago, it certainly is very shiny. But just like the debased denarius or the crown, the coin that Henry VIII produced, which resulted in him being mocked as Old Copper Nose, it's a thin veneer. And as we can see here, the statue is actually quite gray, quite dull. And this reminds me of the biblical story of the Colossus with feet of clay. I think one thing is certain, that neither this US empire is sustained by this failing currency, nor Trump's reputation are long for this world. Now let me finish with the usual words: Res Publica, restucci ende est. Please like, share, and subscribe.